For this lesson, we are going to learn about the 12-bar blues, what it is, and how to add substitute chords in to elaborate on the progression. It is referred to as a 12-bar blues because it is a 12-measure form. For this lesson, we'll explore the 12-bar blues in the key of C. 12-bar blues in the key of C would start on a C chord, which is the 1 chord. In its simplest form, the C chord would last for 4 measures. At measure 5, we would have F, the 4 chord. That would last for 2 measures. At measure 9, the progression will return to C, or the 1 chord. On the next line, we would have a turnaround progression that would bring us back to 1 just before the ending. The turnaround could be a variety of chords, but for now, let's keep it simple with just a 5 leading back to the 1. 12-bar blues progressions and forms are important because they're found in a variety of musical styles, including jazz, rock, country, and blues. All 12-bar blues forms have the basic chords that are shown here. They all start with 1. At the second line, they go to 4, and they return to 1. Have some kind of turnaround that brings you back to 1 for the ending. In jazz and blues styles in particular, it is common for these chords to be 7th chords. It is also most common for all of these structural chords, the 1, the 4, 1, 5, back to 1, to be dominant 7th types of chords. Of course, in most musical styles, it is not typical for a dominant type of chord to be the 1 chord, but it is typical in a blues form. Now we will elaborate on these basic chord possibilities. One chord that you often hear in blues is at the second measure, where a song will go to the 4 chord. From there, they'll follow back to the 1 chord. Another common chord to add is the 5 chord at the end, which will bring you strongly back to the beginning. Now this is still considered a fairly basic 12-bar blues, but we've added some extra chords from the most basic form. Now we will look at a handful of more possibilities for adding chords. We certainly won't exhaust all the possibilities, and therefore you will learn some ideas that you can experiment with. First of all, we will add in some secondary dominant and related 2 chords that lead us to some of these structural chords. Let's start here in this blank measure. A 5 of 4 is already C7. We will go ahead and put this here. But with that, we could use the related 2 chord. In the key of F, the 2 chord is G minor 7. So here we'll have G minor 7, C7, pulling over as a 2-5 of the 4. Now to pull us back to 1, I could also put a 2-5 in this measure. Now before we add in more chords, let's go ahead and take a look at some common substitutes for the turnaround portion of the progression. In rock and roll, country music, blues occasionally, and jazz occasionally, it is not uncommon to have the 5-7 chord here, followed by a 4-7. Typically that's thought of as retrogression, but again, it can be seen in this type of form. More common in jazz, though, would be to replace the 5 here for 2 measures with a 2 followed by a 5. Now continuing on with this idea of secondary dominants and related 2s, we can add a 5 of 2 and its related 2 in this measure. Now let's take a look at the progression at the end. Instead of having a 5 in the last measure, we could replace that with a 2-5. Now we have a much more elaborate version of a 12-bar blues than what we started with. As our final step in our elaboration of this 12-bar blues, we will look at some of the dominant function chords and replace them with sub-5s, tritone substitutions. Now any chord that's functioning as a true dominant can be replaced with a tritone substitution. This will not include the 1 chords or the 4 chords, but it can include any other dominant chord. Let's go ahead and start with our 5 chords in the key. We come here to the end where we have a 5-7 chord pulling us back to the beginning, we can replace that chord with its tritone substitution. We can find that chord by either going a tritone away from G, which gives us a D flat, or by going up a half step from the chord of resolution. Either way, it gives us a D flat 7. Now that we've replaced the dominant chord with this tritone substitution, we'll replace the bracket and arrow with a dotted bracket and a dotted arrow. There are two other G7 chords in this composition that can also be replaced with tritone substitutions. And finally, let's look at the two secondary dominant chords and replace those with tritone substitutions. Here we have the C7, and this spot is not functioning as a 1-7, it's functioning as a secondary dominant chord along with the related 2 to pull over to the 4 chord. The tritone substitution of C7 can be found a tritone away as G flat 7. You can also find it by looking at the chord of resolution F7 and going up by 1/2 step. The next secondary dominant chord is A7. We can find its tritone substitution by going up a tritone to E flat 7, or looking at the chord of resolution and going up a half step to E flat 7. Now we've looked at a number of possible chord substitutions within the 12-bar blues. There are many other chord possibilities to explore as well.